Today we have Chelsea Brennan, the founder of Smart Money Mamas with us, an ex-hedge fund manager turned financial educator. Chelsea is dedicated to changing the way we talk about money, helping moms connect with all aspects of their money in a way that lets them overcome emotional blocks, identify what they most want, and create the healthy money habits that help them achieve their biggest goals. Chelsea, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
We love to ask our guests, could you tell us a bit about your money story?
Absolutely. So I was a kid who was always fascinated by money. I read my first economics book when I was 12 or 13, and my dad's business partner, who was one of the original, like kind of bogle heads, the old forum with Vanguard, really leaned into that interest for me and bought me my first investing book at that age. And so I really wanted to know how money worked in the world. And so that came into me going to college and heading to Wall Street right after school. I worked at Goldman Sachs in New York for several years before moving on to a hedge fund in Boston, where I got to experience investing large amounts of money. And it was really fascinating work. And I learned a ton and I got to work with cool people. But at the end of the day, I became a mom. And I started to think about how my work aligned with my values, with what I wanted to be showing my kids, with how I wanted my schedule to go. And it didn't match up, right? I was done working 80-hour weeks. I was done with a career that at the end of the day didn't have a positive impact on the world, right? Hedge funds make rich people richer. That's their job. And that has their purpose, but that's not what I wanted to do. And so part of my story was my husband is a stay-at-home dad, and we had to make a decision between me, who at that point in my career made mid-six figures, walking away to do something else. And that was really scary and made us had to deal with a lot of our own money mindset issues, even though, on paper, we did very, very well financially and we had the nest egg to leave and all of those things, but we had to decide, did we have the money mindset to leave? And so right before my second child was born, literally from the hospital, I resigned from my hedge fund job, which was not something I would recommend. just the timing of trying to do a whole career change with a newborn is a little bit insane.
Wait, you did it from from the hospital?
Oh my goodness, guys.
Were you like in labor or was it post?
She's like mid push and she's like, I'm out.
I'm done. Yeah, no. So what happened was I had a really difficult pregnancy with my second. I had two herniated discs in my back. And so I was in physical therapy 3 times a week. I couldn't sit or stand for more than 10 minutes at a time. So they had to put a standing desk in my office. So I was constantly moving. And then at 32 weeks, my water broke. And so we rushed to the hospital. We're at Beth Israel in Boston. The high risk OB comes in and he's like, you've had a baby before. So in the next 72 hours, you're going to go into labor and you're going to have a preemie. And they took us to tour the NICU and this whole thing. And I'm still getting emails from work. And we had known that finance was always going to be a first act career for me. We knew at some point I was going to leave. And really probably at that point, we thought it was 3 to 4 years out. But I'm sitting there, I'm stuck in the hospital. I'm still getting emails from work. I'm super stressed. I know that I'm going to need a lot of time to heal post this delivery. And I had started what was the original version of Smart Money Mamas, which at that point was called Mama Fish Saves, about 10 months before. And while it was completely a hobby, it hadn't made any money, I'd found a lot of joy in it. And so in that period where we're waiting for my son to come, my husband and I sat down and said, like, okay, we really have a 2-year runway of cash on hand without touching our investments for me to figure something else out. And so like, let's take this time. I'm going to resign. I'll spend the first year trying to build Smart Money Mamas. If it doesn't work, then I'll have another year to figure out what's next. Right. And so, yeah, I resigned from the hospital. And the craziest story is that apparently in very, very, very small percentage of cases, your water can reseal. And so my water resealed, my levels went back up. My baby stayed until 39 weeks when they induced. He came full term, perfectly healthy little baby boy, which I'm like so grateful for. But yeah, I left in the middle of that chaos, it was an experience.
Wow. You know what, though? I feel like sometimes we need these external factors. And I'm, by the way, so grateful for you, for your son, for your family, that this all worked out and you didn't have to deal with what is very traumatic when a child is born prematurely. But sometimes you need those situations to remind you and make the decision in a way, or make the decision very easy for you. And it sounds like that was what came out of it.
It was. And I think, I needed that push. We had the money. We'd been saving for financial independence for a while. We knew that I was going to do something else. And so it was really just something had to give me the confidence that like it was going to be okay if I left. And so, and yeah, that was the push we needed.
It also just, emphasizes exactly what you said. Financial independence gives you the freedom to make that choice, even in a really chaotic period of time where, it seems extra risky to make that call. So it's great that you were in a position where you could make that decision and walk away.
It's a core belief of Smart Money Mamas and like in what I teach with our community that money and personal development really need to be intricately connected. And I hate how when we read self-development books and ways to improve yourself, we act like money is this thing that shouldn't matter, right? Like money doesn't buy happiness and just pursue your passion. But you can't do that without some level of security, right? So we talk about the money hierarchy of needs, which takes Maslow's and talks about how really each level of Maslow's is a different level of financial independence. That base level of physiological needs. Do you keep a roof over your head and food in your belly? Security. Do you have an emergency fund and you're not constantly having this anxiety that the other shoe is going to drop and something's going to put you in a difficult, unsafe position? And so while money doesn't buy happiness, there's surely plenty of millionaires and billionaires that are very unhappy people. It does give you the option and space to pursue happiness. And so we really need to, if we want to be able to go out, create the lives that we want, live the best versions of ourselves, we have to think about our money and we have to be willing to build wealth in alignment with who we are as people.
I was just reading an article this week in The Atlantic about that, the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and how it relates to money. And it's so true that, obviously the basic needs need to be met and money helps us get that. We can afford our rent, we can buy our food, we can take care of ourselves, bare minimum. But then all of those, relationships to your child, to your partner, to your friends, to your family, like all of that is just enhanced if you can help people out. If I can, help my friends out with money, if I can support them and, build and enhance those things, but it's not a reflection of your self-worth at the same time. So I feel like it's so powerful when you start looking at it across that sort of, it needs to be like a Maslow's money hierarchy of needs, but you can actually the Chelsea Brennan
completely written out on our Instagram page. We have a whole story about it.
So I'm going to share that.
Because the love and belonging level is a really interesting one, right? Because you're talking about relationships and how much easier it is to build relationships when you have some level of financial security. And one of those things is just being able to have the space in your calendar to go out with friends, to have time, right? You're not side hustling constantly. You're not worried about if I go out to dinner tonight, am I not going to be able to pay some bill next week? You have that freedom to help and to spend time with your community. But also it's when we come back to love and belonging of ourselves. And so money mindset is such an important aspect of building this healthy relationship with money. But when we are really in this scarcity place, when we're trying to just make ends meet, talking to somebody about mindset falls on deaf ears. They're like, yeah. Okay. But like, how am I going to eat tomorrow? Right. Once we've built some level of breathing room, now we can take the time and look back and say, okay, what money mindset, what money story have I built back from childhood? How can I write that better? And how can I start to change my beliefs about myself so that I can grow and so that I can love people more and be more involved in my community? Because it always comes back to that we can't love other people more than we love ourselves. And so having that level of security also gives you space to work on yourself in a way that you can't. And then the next level, which is called esteem, that's when you're trying to find work that uses your best skills, right? And so once again, we're back to money of if you want to be able to leave a job that, your boss demeans you, or it's not what you want to do, or you want to start a business, that requires some level of financial freedom too, and that's the level that we were really at, where we call that work flexibility in the money hierarchy of needs. That esteem level is your work flexibility, where you could move to find something that works really well for you.
Chelsea, this is the tea that I needed today. This is going to launch me in a whole different direction. Honestly, for my
Chelsea,
day.
Where were you 6.5 years ago? Actually, we should go back 10. So I could have been saving and really been thoughtful about it.
So actually it's funny. So I was just telling Kelsey, when we started how, I met Catherine right after she had rejoined the corporate world after having her first kid. And I've watched Catherine, now have her third child. So through each child, going back to work, going through the motions of, figuring out, can I get promoted this year? Like mid pregnancy, like it's crazy. And I've seen her change her money mindset and change, how her and her husband are approaching their finances over the course of their 3 kids. How has becoming a parent and a parent once more changed your money mindset or how you interact with money?
Oh, I mean, in so many ways, right? I feel like parenting just changes everything in general. Like you just have to have this major wake up call. And so part of me having this first act career in finance was always that, and I'll go back to, my own work on money mindset. One of the things that I internalized as a kid was that wealth equals worthiness. And so I was raised by a father who idolized wealth and that wealth was this big, amazing thing. And as a natural saver, I fit all his little check boxes, right? Because I was amassing money. And what that meant for me was when I denied myself things that I wanted to buy because I was afraid of watching my bank balance go down, even as a little kid, he would praise that, right? Like, oh, this is going to serve you. You're going to have so much money. And so I had this idea that I had to build all this wealth. This was my goal was to bank money. Money was an end in itself, not a means to an end. And so part of that was giving my kids all these kind of opportunities, right? When I became a parent, they were going to be able to go to, whatever private school and we'd have all these resources. And then I had a kid and all those things are great. There's a lot of freedom involved in that, but it also meant that I didn't see him very much. And that first year of my first baby, I saw him on average about 15 minutes a day during the week because I'd wake up and I'd go to work before he was up and I'd get home just in time to put him to bed. And that was awful. And so I had to rethink, okay, money is not enough for this relationship that I want with my kid. And so how do I better think about money? And so for me, that was rewriting that wealth does not equal worthiness, that there's security. And then there's how do we actually use our money to build a world that we want and a life that we want. And so that was a major shift towards looking at money as a tool instead of just that end in itself, like I was mentioning. And then after that, it was thinking about how do we teach the boys to view money as a tool and something as a source of freedom? Because money, we can't act like money doesn't matter. That's not what we're saying at all, right? We can't just walk away. So how do we walk that balance? And those are some big changes that we went through. Absolutely.
I think that's so, it echoes so much. And Catherine, I want to, if you're able to, I know you have, Catherine is literally pumping with a child right now, which is also just a testament to the fact that she is a super mom, but
I'm not pumping. I'm just breastfeeding.
Oh yeah, breastfeeding. Sorry. But Catherine, can you also talk about how your money mindset has shifted over the course of your 3 kids? Because I know you and I talk about this a lot, but I feel like our listeners will benefit too.
Yeah. So thank you, Katie, for giving me the space. I think when Katie and I first met, what she saw was someone who was in the process of buying a home, was paying for a really expensive daycare, similar position. I was a management, I still am, but I was a management consultant at the time, huffing it to and from client site. And I was seeing my child 15, maybe an hour a day, if I was lucky, depending on meetings. And I know then we at least had the financial savviness or fear or whatever it might be to buy our house on one salary. So we purposely kept things very modest and conservative. And that was because, to your point, Chelsea, parenthood just changes how you prioritize things, what you see as important or worthy of your time. You reassess everything. And all I could think was, I don't know how sustainable this is going to be. One of us might not be able to work. That was almost like a wake-up call that we weren't the power couple I thought we always were. And we may not be able to just always earn this and more each year, and count on this. So let's set ourselves up that we have freedom. And, however many years later, 5 years later, mid-pandemic, pregnant, all of this, my husband was the one who realized he was the one that needed to take a step away from the corporate world and try his own thing. And we were thankfully able to do that because we had bought the house on one salary. So it was at the time kind of a decision we made with a maybe this could happen situation in mind. And then it did happen. And we're now a year and a half since he's been like working for someone else. And we've managed it. You know, to your point, Chelsea, it's not, sometimes we look at it and we think, how did we survive? Like, where did all our money go before? And it was childcare. We were spending at least $41,000 a year just on the two children for childcare. And now we spend more time with our kids and can live a pretty comfortable and similar situation that we were living before when we were earning twice as much.
And obviously both of us, Catherine, have a lot of privilege in this conversation, right? Because we have all this room in our budget, but it comes back to too, not always just assuming that your income is going to go up. And we see this with lifestyle inflation all the time, where people are like, oh, I'm going to buy the house at the end of my budget range because it's okay, because my career is going to grow. And that's not always how it goes, especially, you know, because life is unpredictable. We've seen that with the pandemic. Every parent knows that. But also because sometimes to build the career you want, it looks more like a jungle gym than a ladder. You have to go sideways and backwards and diagonal. And so you want to be able to have the room to do that, to grow. And so leaving some space. We did the same thing with my husband. When my husband was working, we never factored in his salary because we knew he'd likely become a stay-at-home parent. But then we always budgeted and built our house, you know, around my base salary. So I worked in a career where 2/3 plus of my salary or my income was bonus, but we only ever lived on my base because at some point we were going to pivot and we were going to need to do something different. And so I like that you guys thought about that one income with the house. That was great.
I want to jump back, Chelsea, for a minute. And thank you both for sharing that too, because I do not have kids, but I feel like I have benefited, and I know I love asking questions like this because I see it all around me. Like all my coworkers who have children, they're struggling. We saw that during the pandemic, moms are getting pushed out of the workforce. And if you don't have these nest eggs or the privilege to, you know, make some of these decisions, it's really a tough position for women specifically, but, you know, parents together to be making these decisions. But I want to go back to, you know, something that you said earlier, Chelsea, about a lot of these decisions that you're making, you're reflecting your money mindset to your kids. You know, you knew exactly what your dad's money mindset was, and he reflected that, whether he was talking about money or just congratulating you on, you know, burning out in the corporate world. So how are you reflecting money habits to your boys, and how do you recommend parents start showing their kids healthy ways to interact with money?
I want to mention first that it wasn't always obvious what my parents' money beliefs were and what lessons I took away. And I think that requires reflection and work to really dig into where your beliefs come from. I tell a story that my first Wall Street bonus, I wanted to buy a bicycle. That's what I wanted. I wanted a bike. And we went to the bike store with my mom. This is like $1,000 bike. Okay?
We
It's
all
not a
have
cheap
dreams,
bike.
Chelsea. It's totally
Listen,
fine.
We all have dreams. This is it's $1,000 bike. It's not a cheap bike, but it's also not in the frame of what I've just been handed in a check.
No,
Not a lot of
everyone
money.
has their big girl purchase with the first. Yeah, got it.
So we walk into the bike store and I'm looking at this bike. I test ride it, whatever. It's time to buy it. I almost burst into tears, like choked up, upset. And my mom is like, what is going on? I was like, you know what? I don't need the bike. Like I have another bike. It's fine. And like, I was like trying to leave. And so on the sidewalk in New York, my mom's like, we have got to talk about this. Like, what is going on? Like you've earned this money. You have this money, you budget. Like, why is this so upsetting to you? And at first I was just mad at her. I was like, well, it's frivolous. I don't need it. Like I have a bike, whatever it was. And it took years from that conversation until really figuring out what the root of that was. And I had internalized that spending money on yourself was taking away praise. It was that word frivolous, right? It was making these decisions. And so uncovering that can take a while. And what I want to tell parents is that it's never too late, right? If your kids are little, awesome, that's ideal. But if they're not, like your kids are going to work it out. And frankly, most of our core money beliefs are set around age 7, is what research shows. We set around age 7, which is really scary when you're a parent, because you're like, that's not a lot of time. Also, what am I supposed to tell them? Like, am I supposed to be teaching them 401ks and asset allocations? Like, no. What's happening is, as kids and as humans in general, we want the world to be stable and things to make sense. It's how we keep ourselves safe, right? And so when we see things that cause us any kind of anxiety, we make assumptions and rules that control that world. And so usually between the ages of 4 and 7, we understand how money works. We know that we pay to buy things. We kind of get the basics. And we've seen something happen. It was a conversation with a parent. It was seeing our parents fight about money, that in that moment, we made this big decision about how money works in the world. And then we spend decades with it running in the back of our minds and looking for proof of that thing, right? And so you know that as a kid, you lack perspective. You have no idea what's going on. And so sometimes you start to dig and you uncover that belief and you realize it's a contradiction. It doesn't make any sense. But you have to uncover it, right? So first of all, your kids are going to do that. We're doing the best we can. What we can do and what we do with our boys is we make money a normal everyday part of conversation. We'll talk about it when we go shopping, when we're deciding where we donate to charities. We have that conversation at the dinner table. We make it just something that they can ask questions about and that we talk about. We're really careful with our language. And so one of those things is not saying we can't afford it. It's talking about that's not our priority right now. And it's always going into creative problem solving whenever we can. And so if they want something that we don't want to buy them, or it's not in line with our budget at that point, we turn it back to them of, that's not mommy and dad's priority right now, but how could you get the money to do that? And let them start to have that abundance mindset that, oh, I actually have the skills and resources to go out and get the things that I really want. Now, my kids are 6 and 4. Okay. So more than half the time, they forget about the thing, whatever it was. But I didn't tell them no. I told them, you figure it out. And they said, it's not that important for me to figure it out, so I'm just going to let it go. But sometimes they do figure it out. And that's a really great thing. And I think the last thing is that nobody does this perfectly. And as often as we can, we catch ourselves and come back when we say something that we didn't mean, or we had a moment of stress or whatever it was. Just explain to them like, hey, sorry, I didn't mean that. What I meant to say was this. And sometimes they'll call you out, right? We've been doing wants and needs flashcards with the kids since they were little, which is really fun. And you get some fascinating conversations about like what kids think wants and needs are. We had a whole debate.
That could be a TV show. I love that.
We had a whole debate about a bed when my son was like 3. My oldest was 3. He wanted to put it in the wants pile instead of a needs pile. And I was like, why are you putting it there? And this is the other thing. If you want to play this game, we have a printable financial literacy pack that like has this game in it. But the goal is to not tell them the answer, to let them explain why it's a want or a need, because we want to also have our kids understand that everybody's priorities are going to be different. And so I was like, why are you putting this in the want pile? And he's like, well, you could sleep on the couch. Like you could sleep on the floor. Like you don't need a bed, but like, I want a bed. It's more comfortable. And I was like, okay, that's actually fair. Like that's okay. So we put it in, and for a while it stayed in the wants pile, and now it's back in the needs pile because he actually slept on the floor for a while and he decided he didn't like that. And the dog would come and lay with him. And now he's like, I actually need a bed because then I don't get bothered in the middle of the night. But we just have these conversations as often as possible, and then giving them autonomy with money. That's probably the last piece, is let them practice when the stakes are low. And so we started allowance with both boys when they turned 3. It starts really, really simple in our house. We have our give, save, spend jars. The give jars and the save jars always have to have goals associated with them. I think this is really important for kids, is make sure that there's a reason that they're doing those things. Giving should always be something that makes sense to them at the age that they're at. And so giving when your kid is 4 can be buying a present for their friend when their friend is sad, right? Or getting them a card. That makes way more sense than like, oh, we're going to donate to this charity over here. They don't get it. They don't care. Their money is disappearing. And the same thing with saving, right? As parents, we're like, okay, you got to start saving for college and your first car. And oh my gosh, we could start you with a Roth IRA and that would be amazing. And what we've seen in the research with kids is that they actually then associate savings with their money just being taken from them, and they're less likely to save. And so we always set goals think
Catherine,
Catherine is
we
talking
can't hear
again.
you.
Isn't that most of the US population that associates
Oh,
saving with my money's not there, so I'm just not going to bother?
exactly. And so it's setting goals that make sense to them. So we started with like 2 months when they're little, like what's like a few weeks. And then every time they set a new goal, we make them stretch a little bit farther so that we build that muscle of delayed gratification. Because what we want them to learn, what you want your kids to learn when you're teaching them to save, is that saving isn't your money disappearing. Saving is you get really cool things that you couldn't otherwise get. Because that's ultimately what we want to do, right? Even retirement is, I want to be able to not work for 20, 30 years. And that's a really cool thing that I can't otherwise get unless I put the money away. And so we want to build that habit. But yeah, that's kind of how we start to deal with money with the boys.
I love it. And I'm realizing I clearly am a little late to this party. I keep going the lecturing route because I know no other way, where I'm like, when my kids break something and they're like, it's fine, we'll just buy a new one. And I'm like, well, no, because, I haven't said money doesn't grow on trees yet, but I have been saying things like, well, we'd have to save up for it if you want to replace it. And that's going to take time. And, I spend time working to earn money, I'm trying to, and I just know they're not following. So I'm definitely going to have to check out your printables and work with them on this.
Allowance is huge for that because they start to figure out how much things cost. And so, my son is currently saving for this $80 Lego. And we had the same conversation about, we had a conversation about the light. We have this like reading light next to the couch that they knock over like constantly
every day.
Because they're playing Spider-Man ninjas. And so I told him the other day, I'm like, that lamp cost $120. And he was like, that's more than my Lego. Yeah. And then it was like, whoa.
That's like 6 months of allowance saving.
Exactly.
Also, Legos are super expensive. Now that
They
I know
are very
the cost
expensive.
of Legos, I'm like, what is happening?
Legos are so expensive, but my kid will sit and build a Lego for hours, like focused, especially if it's a big set. And so occasionally my husband and I will buy him a big one just so that like we have a whole Saturday that he just sits at the table and doesn't do anything else.
Yeah, that's amazing.
I'll make that investment.
Catherine, how old was your oldest when she went up to you and was like, oh, Mom, we can just go out to eat because you can put it on your credit card? I remember that was like one of the first things you were like, it's happening. She knows about money.
Yeah, I don't know if she said credit card, but she was definitely like, we don't really eat out much with them. And now they're pandemic kids. They haven't like seen the inside of a restaurant in 2 years, which I did want to ask you about, Chelsea. So we'll pin it for a minute. But like, I do think COVID is also going to impact how our kids have been watching us spend, because I've only gone to a store, I think twice now in a 2-year period with my daughter. And once was to pick out a birthday gift and once was to look at, Santa presents that they would be interested in, whatever. Yeah. So that's something we'll have to cover. But I remember we took her to like Panera, which is like a really friendly kid place to go and eat because you just like get your food quick and, in and out. And she really liked it. And I think the next day she was like, so are we going to a restaurant for lunch? And I was like, okay, hold up. Like we went once. And why does she think it's okay to go to a restaurant every day now? And again, I had to have that conversation with her. Well, it costs money. And so like, we wouldn't enjoy it if we went every day. It's a special event. And I'm trying to connect these things, but I think I need some guidance here. So I know I'm on the back foot here. I need to play catch up.
Yeah. I think that talking to our kids about what our priorities are and how much we're willing to spend on things. So we just moved Henry, who's 6, he's my oldest, to Greenlight, which is like a allowance debit card. We love it. He was ready. He kept asking why we got to spend with cards and he used cash and he wanted to understand. And I think that once your kids, 6 is a little early. Henry is first of all, he's been talking about money since, he could talk because he lives with me, but also he's just very math minded. So it's easy for him to look at his Greenlight and say, I've got $27. If I spend 15, this is what I have left. You want your kids to be ready to do that before you move them to a card. But after that, as a family, we use Cube, which is a budgeting service that combination between a digital bank and an envelope system. And so it's really easy for me to say to Henry, now that we're having these conversations, hey, this is how much we have in our restaurant budget. So if we go to lunch today, we can't go to lunch until 2 weeks from now or whatever it is. Do you want to do it now or do you want to do it later? And letting him kind of gauge that conversation. Obviously, we don't always let our 6-year-old make decisions about what we're doing, but sometimes letting him just think about it. And we can also use that to say, like, we really, we know that we're going to the aquarium in a week and we're going to want to have lunch out then. So why don't we wait? What can we do at home instead? And coming back to like letting them make a different choice, not being like, no, we're not having any fun today. It's just let them make a different choice. But letting them see some transparency about how we make these decisions and what the limitations are. And that does take practice. And it means that they have to have their hands on some money sometimes. And I think that's the big thing, because they don't get it if they've never had to deal with the limitations. And that's why when we talk about allowance, people ask all the time, like, what's the right amount of allowance? And it really depends on what you expect your kids to cover with their allowance. And so you want to make sure you set that number so they have enough money to do some of the things that they want to do, but not all of the things that they want to do. Because making that choice and feeling that pain when that money runs out is what's going to teach them how to make those decisions.
So, Chelsea, just to completely back up exactly what you just said about talking with your kids and getting their hands on money is actually one of the best ways. We have some stats here. A 2015 Standard & Poor's survey found that only 57% of adults are financially literate. But parents who discussed financial topics with their kids were more likely to have kids who felt that they were smart about money. And so I do think that we are seeing the correlation that even if you're not financially literate, you're still probably having money conversations or showing your money habits to your kids, and they're picking it up. So having more intentional conversations can make your kids at least be more financially literate or feel smarter with their money. I can say that I was in the bucket of having parents who I would say now looking back definitely did not have any of these financial literacy tools or resources. But I still definitely have memories of talking money, but in not necessarily, like you said, we definitely weren't talking about 529 plans over dinner when I was 7 or 13. But like one of my oldest memories that I have is every Sunday there would be the big pile of like all the grocery pamphlets, brochures would come to our house, and me and my mom would make our grocery list, and then we would like see what's on sale. We would coupon the shit out of it, go to the stores, and of course you'd go to multiple stores and get the deals. And I remember like my mom showing me the receipts and saying, look, we saved like this much by buying these things. And that's sort of how that worked. And it almost became a game for me to be like, oh, we want to save more. We want to like coupon or whatever more. I'm happy to do that with you. And so I do think that there's things like that where I'm thinking about it and I'm like, I was seeing how my parents were interacting with money. I was seeing that they were trying to budget and save where they could, and then also splurge in other ways where we would go on a vacation and it was a free for all. But I think, now kind of going to where Catherine was going, I think about how many moms I know are getting their groceries delivered. They're not going to a store. If they are going to a store, especially during the pandemic, they probably weren't bringing their kids who weren't vaccinated. So is it changing what kids are seeing as far as how their parents are interacting with money? Like I was just thinking about it the other day because we got our groceries delivered and I was like, I wonder if kids just think that like food shows up and like that's it, or
the Amazon ferry delivers.
Yeah, like seriously, I was thinking about as we get more, and I've even like our downstairs neighbor has a 5-year-old, and I saw her she's very confident talking to Alexa. Alexa, turn on Encanto. Love that. Play it over and over again. But I've also seen her say, Alexa, add strawberries to the grocery list. And I wonder if that's sort of changing how kids are going to interact with money.
I think it is. I want to say first that I want to just reiterate for everybody that whether or not you intentionally teach your kids about money, you're teaching your kids about money. They're watching your behavior behavior, even just like the mood in the kitchen when you're paying the bills, right? A lot of us can remember watching one of our parents do that, and we pick up on all of that energy. And so even if you feel like you're not super financially literate, it's actually can be a benefit to come to your kids and learn alongside them, because we're all on this journey together. We're all going to be doing money mindset work, money learning throughout our lives. And so showing our kids that you don't have all the answers, and that's okay. Here's how we figure it out. That's going to be a really beneficial thing. But as far as digital money, it's a really difficult thing, because until kids really hit that 8 or 9-year-old age, having things that are intangible is very hard for them to process, right? They can hold money, they can do the sorting, they can figure out that kind of math. But when you're like, well, this money lives in the internet, in the bank, and like I transfer it through this people and they deliver, it's very confusing for our kids. And so I think that as often as you can make it real for them, the better. And so if you're doing online grocery shopping, an exercise that we do in the grocery store with our boys when we can is that we'll come in and say, we've got $30 this week for fruit. You guys decide how we're going to do the fruit. Does this mean that grocery shopping takes longer? Sure. But my husband's a stay-at-home dad, so he's got to kill time anyway. So where they're not destroying the house. And so let them go through and see, hey, if we buy apples and oranges, we get a lot more fruit than if I buy raspberries, in which case I've got like a day's worth of fruit for our boys. And so, but you can also do that online, and you can start to, if you have play money with your kids, if you even just have, little coins or something that you can show them of, here, you have 20 of these. If we add this to the cart, bananas to the cart, we have to take this away, and start to show them those limitations. It can be helpful, but also just let them ask those questions. And when they say things like, you could just order it off Amazon, ask follow-ups to try to figure out what they think is happening, because often what you think they're imagining is not what it is, right? They might understand on some level that the magic Amazon fairy is not just dropping things at the house, but the why that they've come up with could be insane. And so I'll give you an example.
There's some adults that also believe the Amazon fairy just shows up at the house.
Oh yeah. I mean,
so I can only imagine what
100%.
kids think is happening.
Well, I have a great story. So for the boys giving, they quote unquote adopt animals from the World Wildlife Foundation. They save up. And when you do that, you get a certificate and a stuffed animal. And it's a really fun experience for us as a family, because when they pick an animal, we learn about why that animal's endangered and where is it from and all the things. So the first time my son did this, he rescued a snow leopard. And so he saved his money. We got his dollars. I explained to him that he was going to give me the money, and I would use the money that was on my card to rescue this snow leopard. And so we're sitting down. I'm so excited. I think I've just like nailed this whole experience, right? I'm doing great. And he looks at me and he goes, Mom, what if the snow leopards lose their money? And I was like, what? He goes, the snow leopards don't have pockets. What if they lose their money? And I was like trying really hard not to burst out laughing, because, you also don't want to like minimize their, and I was like, that is a valid concern. You are right. They don't have pockets. I was like, actually, buddy, snow leopards don't know anything about money. Snow leopards don't use money. And so I had to like step back for a second and be like, okay, now how do I explain a charity to a 4-year-old? At that point, he was 4. And so I ended up saying, you know how you and your brother have adults that take care of you, me and daddy and your grandparents? And he's like, yep. I'm like, snow leopards have adults that take care of them. And so these people, so we're sending the money to the adults that take care of the snow leopards. So, okay. Which ended up like a couple days later coming back, and we ended up having this whole conversation about helpers and people out there who take care of animals and other people and all of these things. But to him, I thought I had explained this whole situation, and he's sitting there going, snow leopards are going to lose their money. Like, what are they going to do?
They don't have
I wonder if
like
that's why
kangaroos.
I wonder if that's why I didn't go with like a sea animal. Like, no, if that money
That's
gets
a
wet,
good
Money's going to
question.
get wet.
your son has a career in like operations or logistics. So I really appreciate that.
He sounds very practical. I like that.
He's very practical.
I
He
like
was,
that.
his pretend play is very funny. We were playing this game at one point where we were running around finding treasure. He's a pirate, and we were finding treasure that was M&Ms, and we'd find the treasure and we'd pretend to eat it. And I was, a parent, I get tired of this game after a while. So for like 10 minutes, I was like, oh, I'm so full. I can't eat any more M&Ms. He stopped and looked at me. He's like, Mom, it's pretend. You can't get full from pretend M&Ms. It's like, called me right out. Okay, we'll keep playing.
They'll say anything to keep you playing.
Exactly. Mom, it's pretend.
Oh, I love it so much. So I guess this question, I know we have only a few questions left, but this question is really, I want to hear from both of you. For those of us who, don't have kids and are listening to this, but definitely see a family as something that they want in the future, what should we be doing financially to prepare to start a family?
So I'll go first and just say, figuring out what financial security means to you. And we talked earlier about the money hierarchy of needs, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Security is going to look different for different people. So how much emergency fund you need, what kind of insurance, life insurance, health insurance you need to feel secure. It's going to depend on your childhood and the flexibility of your job and all those things. So really getting deep on what makes you feel safe, and then building that foundation so that you're prepared for a big life change like a child. Obviously, we can make it work at any point because kids come as a surprise. There's things, but the more safe we can feel, the more flexibility we're going to have when that big life change happens. And so I don't necessarily, you don't need to create a baby high yield savings account and start saving for a baby. That can be a great thing if you're ready, but this is really just padding that emergency fund, thinking about your career. Are there ways that you can lean in a little bit now to get that raise, or to get into a position where you can ask for work flexibility, things like that, so that you have some more options as the baby comes.
Thank you, Chelsea. I appreciate that. And I think the safety thing is huge, whether, for anything, just feeling safe and having money be a conduit for that is powerful. Catherine, what would you recommend?
I love
She's gonna be like,
Chelsea.
Just don't.
So 2 things. I talk about this one. I talk about one of them a lot, and one I think I embody, but maybe I don't preach as much about. One is learn to live with less. I think you really have to feel confident in yourself, no matter what people around you are doing with their money, what they think you should be doing with your money. I think feeling really clear and confident in living with less will actually open up the door for more financial freedom for you and your family. And this one, which is slightly more contentious, Chelsea, is that it's not your job to pay for your children's college. So we have set up, because I married a European who went to full master's program level education for free,
Mm-hmm.
and also graduated debt free for him. And that's just maybe because of where we come from, that concept of your parents remortgaging their home to help you go to college and ruin their financial retirement in the process, or not plan for their own future, is debilitating and not fiscally responsible. So I think it's great that you want to have children. If you do want to start a family or adopt, or however your children are going to come into your life, I think it's fair to actually encourage them to be independent, contributing members of society with or without a college education. And if they're going to get a college education, support them in how they're going to fund that education. But I don't think you should. I see a lot of people saying, I'm only going to have one child because that's all I can afford to send to college. And that shouldn't dictate, to me, the shape that your family takes that in isolation.
I think we have a lot of people in this generation of parents that have their own trauma related to student loans, where it wasn't explained well and they're still paying them off, and it causes them a lot of anxiety, and they don't want to pass that on to their kids. And that's totally valid. However, I agree with you that you have to take care of yourself first. And what we tell parents all the time is like, if you're going to sacrifice your retirement and your long-term financial security to send your kids to college, you're just going to be dependent on them in the future.
You're going to be a big burden on them.
And so you have to take care of it now. And that there's so many other resources to help your kids, where it's applying for scholarships and teaching them how to look at financial aid and look at different options for schooling. I think that's absolutely a great point. And you have to decide what you're willing to pay for your kids and what you can do without sacrificing yourself. I completely agree with that.
And I think this goes back to exactly what you were saying. And I think you both said it at different times during this episode, which is like, what other people project on you and your family is not necessarily the right choice for you. Whether your parents are expecting their grandkids to go to the best private schools, or even if that's something that you project on yourself, like there's going to be things where you have to look at your situation and understand what that looks like, whether that's not even college, but even just, I see so many parents who are like, if my kid doesn't go to the best preschool and we don't start saving for that now, then we've set them up for failure. And that's just so much pressure to put on yourself as well as your kid. It's also a financial burden at that point.
And it's also not what research would suggest. So I'm a huge education nerd. I love learning about how we educate kids and how we grow them to be resilient and successful. And over, we see that having an engaged, happy parent, having books in the home, the number of books in the home is a major indicator of long-term success. That matters way more than even what school they go to, your tax bracket, all of those things. Having an engaged parent and having resources to learn, those are the biggest ones. And so your kid's going to be fine. They're going to figure it out. If you're even thinking about this, you're probably ahead of the game, right? And so I think that's just reminding ourselves too, that we put all this pressure on ourselves for like the best preschool and the best this and the best tutors, and their kids are going to be okay.
They are.
And Chelsea, I will say the best, that's also subjective because I've spent a lot of money on what fundamentally and out in the world is considered name brand daycare providers. There's still a lot to be desired from those situations. And I often say to my husband, I'm like, well, what is the best, right? Because everybody tells me I'm at the Mercedes of daycares or whatever, and it doesn't feel like a Mercedes.
Well, and it really depends on what we look at, right? And we can talk about just the difference in education across, you said your husband's European. When we look at these school systems that actually test and have outcomes that are much higher than the US, they're not teaching reading until 6 or 7. They're not doing homework. There's completely different things. And I have friends whose kids go to those kind of daycares where they have homework at age 4. Is that better? Like, is that what we want? And I'm a big believer that creativity and problem solving are going to be what drives long-term success. We're kind of moving out of that era where we need people standing operating machines, right? We need to have creative thinking. Mm-hmm. And so as much freedom as we can give our kids is good too. Just let them explore.
Chelsea, I want to call out a quote that I absolutely love on Smart Money Mama's website. But I think it also just reflects what you just said about being a happy and engaged parent is also sometimes the best thing you can do for your kids. But I just want to echo this to our listeners. This is on their website. Definitely check it out. But we want all moms to view money management as a true form of self-care. And I think that is one of the greatest gifts that you can give to yourself and to your kids.
Absolutely.
Yes.
I have goosebumps.
Catherine, do you want to do the fun question?
Yes, Chelsea, before we set you free for your snowy afternoon, there's one more question we'd like to ask of all of our guests, just so our listeners get to know you a little bit better on a personal level. That question is, what is something you always skimp on, and what is something you will always splurge on?
Ooh, clothes I always skimp on. I don't care. I'm in a hoodie and jeans like all the time. That's just, it's
you're in the Mark Zuckerberg uniform. You got it.
I just don't care. Oh, honestly, it's like one of my favorite parts about leaving corporate is no longer having to put a suit on.
Freeing.
Freeing. I always splurge on books. And so you guys can't see me because this is a podcast,
Yeah.
but I have my big bookshelf behind me with all my favorite authors. We've actually moved our living room in our house. We took the TV out and built a whole wall of bookshelves. And so we have it's alphabetical by author, and the bottom 2 rows are just for the kids. And I will always splurge on books. I love to read. I want the boys to love to read. And so that is a place where I always have money in the budget for books.
Oh, I love that. I have just been seeing a lot on Instagram, like these beautiful library, like different ways people set up their books in their home. And I am trying to figure out what works best in my space because I have books, but they're just in piles, like in every room.
Yeah, I'm the same. I have like piles of books per room.
It's just like not organized. Meanwhile, I'm looking at your bookshelf and I'm like, there's colors that go together.
Yeah.
It looks so nice.
It's so pretty. It's like the home edit one where it's like a rainbow with it. My
complaint, can't find books that way though. Like this is all alphabetical by author.
Yeah. You need the Dewey Decimal System going on because I will say so because we lived abroad, we moved this way and I gave a lot of our books away. It was really hard to part with them, but I'm now rebuilding our book collection because fun fact, moving books is very costly and heavy.
Yes.
And so I actually only have probably one color of each, only a few colors of each book. So you just couldn't even make a rainbow on my bookshelf yet.
Well, we still have books in every room. And as I'm constantly telling my husband, there's no such thing as too many books, just not enough bookshelves.
Oh, yes. I like that. I like that. Yeah. And you can get some real designer ones. I'll tell you one quick fun story before we go. I have a family relative and the whole family loves to read. They're just always knows of the book. And their son unfortunately broke his arm. And when I was like, oh my gosh, like what happened? They're like, he slipped on a book. I was like, of course he did. And this was before I had kids. So I was kind of like, how does a kid slip on a book? Well, fun fact, I now know how kids slip on books because they're very slippery. They're like a banana peel.
And they leave them everywhere.
And they're everywhere. Yes. And now I'm like, okay, it all makes sense. Full circle. Now I get it.
We just crossed just a couple weeks ago. My son started reading much more fluently, my 6-year-old, because he just turned 6 last week. And he is now reading books to his brother. And it's like my favorite thing since becoming a mother is like watching him read Piggy and Gerald to his little brother is the cutest thing ever.
Oh, that's awesome.
Oh my gosh. I love that
inspirational.
So much.
Chelsea, thank you so much for joining us. We really got so much out of this conversation and I can't wait to check out more on your website with how to facilitate conversations about money and get into those good habits with kids.